Choose employment or eviction, my husband demanded, his words like a slap in the face. A sudden surge of indignation flooded my veins. Why should I tolerate someone who thrives on demeaning others to boost his own ego? I deserve better than this. My name is Melissa. At 36, I navigate the realms of both work and homemaking. As a freelance illustrator, I craft my art from the comfort of home. Art has always been my passion, leading me through art college and into the workforce at a design firm. But at 30, I took the leap into independence, craving the freedom to express myself on my own terms. Back then, I embraced singlehood, believing I could sculpt my life as I pleased. Then Daniel entered the picture, introduced to me by a mutual acquaintance. We clicked, married swiftly, and formalized our union a year later. Daniel's job as a salesman for a company with branches scattered nationwide kept him constantly on the move. With his demanding schedule, he suggested I take on the role of a housewife, prompting me to temporarily set aside my career as an illustrator. It made sense. Someone had to tend to the household while he juggled long hours and frequent travels. I viewed it as a mutual support system, an essential part of our marriage. While I didn't mind putting my career on hold, I believed I could always pick up where I left off once things settled down, all while pursuing further studies. Despite the adjustments, our love remained strong, grounded in trust and understanding. We shared a bond that weathered the challenges of distance and busy schedules. However, life had a surprise in store for us. Daniel received a promotion to lead a new sales office, signaling an end to the constant transfers. It was a significant milestone, commonly referred to as a promotion. With my new position came the promise of stability. We wouldn't be uprooted anytime soon, allowing us to establish roots in one city at last. The constant nomadic lifestyle had worn us down, leaving us yearning for a sense of permanence. Now the prospect of settling in a single town filled us both with relief and joy. Previously, my focus had been solely on supporting my husband, leaving little room for personal aspirations. But with this change, I dared to envision a different future, one where I could resume my career. However, the transition didn't unfold as smoothly as I had anticipated. While my husband grappled with the demands of his new role, overseeing the transition and launching fresh branches, a new challenge emerged. The soaring cost of living in our new city exceeded our expectations. Surviving on my husband's income was a tightrope act we managed, but just barely. Unfortunately, his company didn't extend any help with housing costs, leaving us to foot the bill entirely on our own. Despite our desire to save for the future, his paycheck barely covered our basic expenses. The thought of dipping into our savings crossed my mind, but it didn't sit right. Security was paramount. So I broached the subject with my husband, asking if it would be feasible for me to work as well, provided I still maintained the household. His response was hesitant, eventually conceding with a cautious agreement, albeit with a caveat to prioritize homemaking. Though his words struck a discordant note, I attributed it to the upheaval of our changing circumstances. After all, I've always supported him wholeheartedly as a housewife. I chose not to dwell on the unease lingering beneath the surface. As I ventured back into the workforce, thrilled to have found a job I truly enjoyed, I noticed a troubling shift in my husband's demeanor. Gone was the supportive partner I once knew, replaced by someone critical and discontented. "What's the deal with this dinner?" he grumbled one evening, eyeing the spread of roast chicken, themed vegetables, chowder, and fruit with disdain. "This food sucks. Why are you cutting corners when you're home all day?" His sudden nitpicking caught me off guard. It was a behavior he'd never exhibited before. "This food is like hospital meals. It's not building up any strength," he continued, his criticism relentless. Feeling defensive, I explained, "That's not true. I found some deals on ingredients, so I made a main dish and a side. You like hearing that?" His response was a shout of frustration. "What are you saying? My salary is too low." I couldn't understand his reaction. My return to work was supposed to bring fulfillment and a sense of contribution, not discord within our household. His sudden outburst left me reeling, stunned by the venom in his words. Why was he twisting my intentions like this? His anger rendered me speechless. "Do you have any idea how hard I work to support you?" he snapped, his frustration palpable. "Just when I get promoted and things are looking up, don't mess it up by doing something unnecessary." I yearned to retaliate, to defend myself, but I held my tongue. Perhaps he was under immense pressure, burdened by the weight of his new responsibilities. He was the one in charge now, tasked with safeguarding our family's well-being. In that moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Maybe he was just exhausted, overwhelmed by the demands of his role. "I'm sorry," I murmured, swallowing my pride. "I apologize." In my heart, I convinced myself that his outburst was merely a manifestation of fatigue and stress. Despite my return to work, his domineering demeanor persisted. "Hey, are you slacking?" he barked one day, interrupting my tasks. "I'm cleaning the bathroom." "Where's the shirt I was going to wear today? At least shine my shoes." His behavior was a far cry from the person he once was. What had changed? It seemed like he had transformed into someone unrecognizable, prone to constant yelling and shouting. Each day, my trust in him eroded a little more. Balancing the demands of housework and my job proved to be more challenging than I had anticipated. I longed to steal moments to work in between chores, but striving for perfection to meet his standards left me with little time for anything else. If I dedicated myself to meeting my clients' deadlines, the spare moments I had for household tasks were woefully insufficient. I've also started working, I ventured, hoping to prompt some understanding. "Can't you help a bit with the chores?" His response cut deep. "It's because you're busy with your worthless job that the housework is suffering," he fired back, his words stinging with contempt. "Just quit. Don't get cocky just because you work from home. You're not even making much and you're acting so high and mighty even though you're just a housewife." The label of just a housewife became his favored insult, a barb aimed directly at my self-worth. According to him, my employment status mattered little. I was still relegated to the role of a housewife. The logic was twisted, incomprehensible to me. True, my earnings weren't substantial, but that was partly due to his constant interruptions, hindering my ability to focus and expand my workload. Frustrated by his lack of support, I made a conscious decision to scale back on the chores I did for him, prioritizing my work instead. Predictably, his displeasure only intensified, widening the chasm between us. As I tidied the room one day, I stumbled upon a stray pay stub belonging to my husband. Carelessly left on the desk, it piqued my curiosity. I was familiar with his salary, but I had never seen a pay stub before. Driven by a nagging sense of curiosity, I couldn't resist taking a closer look. To my shock, the amount listed on the pay stub was significantly lower than what I had been led to believe. It was barely half of what I had expected. Confusion clouded my mind. Where was the missing amount coming from? My husband provided me with monthly living expenses and rent, with the remainder for his personal spending. Hadn't he recently been promoted? How could his salary have plummeted like this? Since when had this been going on? I scoured through the papers, searching for any earlier pay stubs, but came up empty-handed. What was the truth behind this discrepancy? In that moment, my lingering suspicion towards my husband solidified into certainty. We couldn't possibly sustain our livelihood on this reduced amount. What was he thinking? Why had he kept such a crucial detail hidden from me? Why hadn't he disclosed that his salary had taken a nosedive? As I gathered the pay stubs, preparing to confront him, the shrill ring of the phone shattered the tense silence. On the other end was my husband's uncle, a relative I had only crossed paths with a handful of times. "Uncle, it's been a while. What's going on?" I greeted him, trying to mask my growing apprehension. "Well, it's a bit awkward, but I've lent him some money. It's been a while, and I'm starting to wonder when I'll see it back. I'm in a bit of a tight spot," he confessed, his tone uneasy. "He owes you money?" The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. My husband had been bridging the gap in his salary with loans from his uncle, a substantial sum reaching into the tens of thousands. As the realization hit me, I felt a surge of guilt. I apologized profusely to his uncle, promising to repay him as soon as possible. Despite the situation, his uncle showed remarkable kindness, reassuring us with a gentle, "Just pay it back when you can." That night, I chose to keep the knowledge of the debts and pay stubs to myself. However, with each passing moment, my simmering anger towards my husband intensified. His constant belittlement, the exploitation of my efforts around the house, and the interference with my work had worn me thin, and that night was no exception. As he continued his barrage of criticism, his words stung with familiar disdain. "When will you ever get good at household chores?" he chided, his tongue dripping with contempt. "The food's terrible. The entryway's a mess. What have you been doing at home?" Another useless job, I bet. Being a housewife must be easy. His relentless tirade only fueled the flames of resentment burning within me. Doesn't he realize the contradiction in his words? I fulfill the same household duties as anyone else. If you're unhappy, why don't you take over? You've been coming home on time lately. You're capable, I countered, refusing to yield. But my defiance only seemed to stoke his anger. With a forceful slam of his fist on the table, he snapped. Since when did you become so mouthy? Don't overstep, you waste of money. Do you even know who's providing for you? I refused to back down. What's wrong with standing up for myself? I'm doing my part. What about you? I challenged him, meeting his glare head-on. I refused to tolerate this any longer, I declared, my resolve firm. But he showed no sign of backing down. You pretend to contribute around the house, but you're all talk. Start earning, then we'll talk. I bit back the retort that rose to my lips, recognizing the hypocrisy in his words. Maybe the same could be said for you, I thought, but I held my tongue. Should have never married you, he continued, his words laced with venom. What a drain on our finances you've become. You keep complaining about money, so why don't you do something about it? If you're not going to work, then leave. I gathered my already prepared bags and made my way towards the door. You can't handle anything on your own, anyway. Why do you think you can leave? He challenged, his tone dripping with disbelief. Giving him a steely gaze, I retorted, by the way, I'm leaving. I've already completed the paperwork. With a decisive motion, I slapped the divorce papers I had obtained from the city hall onto the table. The shock on his face was evident. He hadn't anticipated my departure, let alone the initiation of divorce proceedings. He stood frozen, rendered speechless by the sudden turn of events. Well, that settles it, I stated firmly. Make sure you fill out your portion and submit it soon. With that, I turned and left, determined to reclaim my autonomy and forge a new path forward. I departed from our home and made my way to my parents, where I had already briefed them on the situation. They greeted me with open arms, providing comfort and support in the midst of turmoil. As I recounted the sudden shift in my husband's behavior, the revelation of his true income, and the mounting debt he had concealed, my parents grew increasingly concerned. Their advice was clear: divorce him without delay. I shared their sentiment, fully intending to initiate the divorce proceedings. However, a nagging doubt lingered in my mind. Would he even cooperate and complete the necessary paperwork? Dad mentioned he'd connect me with a lawyer if things got complicated. I confided to my father, grateful for his supportive stance and the promise of legal assistance. With each passing day, I longed for a swift resolution to my marital turmoil. A week after my departure, my husband unexpectedly appeared at my parents' doorstep. "Have you completed the divorce papers?" I inquired, bracing myself for his response. "Sorry, I wanted to ask if you had filled them out. Can we please discuss this? Can you reconsider the divorce?" His plea caught me off guard. He seemed uncharacteristically vulnerable. Though my parents regarded him with skepticism, they conceded that a conversation was warranted. It turned out there was never a promotion. His supposed career advancement was nothing but a fabrication. In reality, he had been reassigned to a subsidiary, a move that amounted to a demotion, hence the decrease in his salary. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow. It seemed he had never quite excelled in his role. While I had harbored suspicions about his competence, I hadn't realized the extent of his ineptitude. As the pieces fell into place, I learned that his frequent transfers and job changes were not a testament to his ambition, but rather a reflection of his inability to perform adequately. He had become known as the office's hot potato, perpetually passed from one role to another due to his shortcomings. Now, he found himself stranded in an inconsequential subsidiary, trapped in an environment where promotions were virtually non-existent and individuals were often forced out. My husband's pride was always towering, perhaps too towering for him to admit the truth and instead fabricate a promotion. With his status at work diminished, he sought solace in inflating his ego at home, asserting superiority under the guise of providing for a housewife like you. His belittling remarks and deliberate undermining of my work were all part of his effort to uphold his pride. "It took your absence for me to realize how much you were earning before you left," he remarked, a veiled attempt to salvage his wounded ego. I strategically left a copy of my bank statement in his room. Despite earning less than him, my income was still significant enough to support our lifestyle. I realize I need you, I confessed, acknowledging the practical realities of our situation. I can't manage the rent alone. But together, I believe we can overcome these challenges. Let's give our relationship another chance. I want to build a future with you, one without causing each other pain. His eyes welled up with tears at my heartfelt plea, but I remained resolute. If you're struggling with rent, then perhaps it's best for you to find a more affordable place on your own, I suggested bluntly. And what about your uncle's debt? You need to address that too. His shock at my knowledge of his debts betrayed his ongoing attempts to conceal his financial burdens and start afresh. Some people simply refuse to face reality. I understand you were trying to make ends meet by borrowing from your uncle, but if we're considering a fresh start, shouldn't honesty be our foundation? I questioned, my tone laced with disappointment. Your deception has shaken my trust in you. I can't fathom entrusting our daughter's care to someone who hides such significant debts from her own family. How were you planning to address the debt without her knowledge? My husband remained silent, his expression betraying a mixture of guilt and apprehension. Undeterred, I pressed on. If you refuse to agree to the divorce, I'll have no choice but to involve a lawyer, I declared firmly. Your hurtful comments alone provide sufficient grounds for divorce, and I have the evidence to prove it, so be prepared. It appeared my husband had resigned himself to our fate as he retrieved the divorce papers from his bag. I've made irreparable mistakes. It's too late now. We're strangers, he admitted somberly. Accepting the papers, I noted our sparse shared assets, a modest savings that we divided between us. With that settled, we vacated the apartment we once shared as a couple. I later learned that my husband had decided to leave his job. The news of our impending divorce had spread through his workplace, exacerbating an already uncomfortable environment. He confided in me that he was now working part-time, gradually repaying his debt to his uncle. Following the divorce, he persisted in reaching out to me multiple times. I want to rebuild what we had. Nothing's been the same since we parted ways. I've come to realize you were the only one in my corner. Can we try again? His relentless pleas for reconciliation began to unsettle me, prompting me to change my phone number. If only he had set aside his pride and been forthright from the start, perhaps we could have found common ground as a couple. However, I refused to overlook his abusive behavior, and any remnants of love have long since dissipated. With a heavy heart, I silently distanced myself from him, choosing to walk away for good. Following the divorce, I wholeheartedly threw myself back into my career as an illustrator. Though the workload is demanding, each day brims with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. As a newly liberated individual, I'm met with the promise of a radiant future. Surprisingly, my profession has become my most devoted companion. Who could have foreseen that a single moment of courage and determination would wield such transformative power over my life? This is my one and only chance at existence, and I'm resolved to seize each day with unwavering determination and without a shred of regret. Lost in contemplation, I tore my gaze away from the computer screen, allowing my thoughts to drift as I gazed out the window.